The day my husband suddenly passed away, my world crumbled. Tyler had been the love of my life, and I had never imagined a life without him. The grief was overwhelming, and as I tried to process his loss, his parents showed up at my door. With tears barely dried on my cheeks, I was met with a shocking request from my mother-in-law. "Now that Tyler is gone, you'll be returning to your parents' place, right?" she said coldly. I was stunned. This was the home Tyler and I had built together, filled with memories of our short but beautiful time together. It felt like a part of him still lingered in every corner. Yet, here I was, being asked to leave, as if I had no right to stay. My mother-in-law's eyes gleamed as she explained, "It would be a shame to leave the house empty, so we'll move in here." I couldn't believe it. Was I really being pushed out of my own home right after losing my husband? As I stood there, too shocked to respond, memories of how I met Tyler flooded my mind. I worked at a real estate company, and Tyler was the brother of my colleague. We were introduced through mutual gatherings, and although I found him charming, I never saw him as anything more than a friend. But fate had other plans. One day my colleague had set up a lunch that only Tyler and I could attend. At the time, I didn't realize it was all part of a plan to bring us closer. That day, we talked for hours, sharing personal stories and dreams. Tyler's warm smile and easygoing nature drew me in, and before I knew it, our relationship had blossomed. In no time, we were married, and I couldn't have been happier. I never thought that just a few years later, I would be facing this nightmare, standing alone in our home. After we got married, meeting Tyler's parents for the first time had been nerve-wracking. I remember being so anxious about how they would perceive me, but they were warm and welcoming, or so I thought at the time. My mother-in-law had gone out of her way to make me feel comfortable, and I appreciated it. Tyler's family was close-knit, and they had always respected our independence. When we inherited a house from my grandfather, we thought we'd finally found the perfect place to settle down. It was in a great location, and its value had been increasing steadily. We had considered selling it to fund our dream home. Tyler and I were excited about our future together, but little did I know that my in-laws had their eyes on the property all along. I started to notice small changes in my mother-in-law's behavior, subtle signs that hinted she was more interested in the land than in us. Our lives changed drastically when Tyler was suddenly transferred to another city for work. It was supposed to be temporary, but with his new demanding role, he rarely came home. My mother-in-law began visiting me more often, filling the void left by Tyler's absence. At first, I appreciated her company, but as time passed, her visits became frequent and increasingly overbearing. Every weekend, she insisted on taking me out, dragging me to fancy stores and expensive restaurants. What troubled me most was that she never offered to pay. Each time, she'd conveniently leave the store early, forcing me to settle the bill. I felt trapped, but I didn't know how to confront her. Tyler's absence made it even harder for me to handle the situation, and with each passing day, I felt more and more isolated. The more she pushed, the more I started to realize something wasn't right. As the weeks went by, my mother-in-law's behavior grew even stranger. She began making subtle demands for money, cloaking her requests under the guise of small favors. "Could you lend us some money for dinner?" she'd ask, as if it were nothing. I wanted to talk to Tyler about it, but he was so busy and far away that I didn't want to burden him. When I tried to suggest they talk to him about their financial troubles, my mother-in-law brushed it off, saying it would be embarrassing to ask their son. I started to realize that they had been relying on me financially more than I ever expected. Soon enough, I was lending them money on a regular basis. I knew this wasn't normal, but I didn't know how to say no. Every time I thought about standing up to them, I hesitated, afraid of the conflict that might follow. Then came the day when everything changed. Tyler was gone, and I had lost my lifeline. My in-laws, instead of offering comfort, arrived with a truck full of their belongings ready to move in. They didn't ask. They just assumed it was their right. As I stood there in disbelief, My mother-in-law smiled. "We've always wanted this house. It's valuable. And now that Tyler is gone, there's no reason for you to stay." My heart sank. I had known for some time that they were after the property, but to hear her say it so blatantly was devastating. It was never about family for them. It was about the land, the money, the inheritance. I knew I had to act fast. They assumed I would simply step aside, but what they didn't know was that Tyler and I had already sold the house. I had kept the sale a secret to protect myself, and now it was my only way out. As my in-laws moved their furniture into the driveway, a moving truck from the new owners arrived. The confusion on their faces was priceless. They had no idea what was happening. "Excuse me, we're here to move in," said the new homeowners, who had no clue about the drama unfolding. My in-laws stood frozen, unable to process what was going on. When I calmly told them that the house was no longer mine, they were furious. My mother-in-law's face twisted in disbelief. "What do you mean you sold it?" she demanded. Her voice rose, filled with anger and shock. She couldn't comprehend that I had taken control of the situation. I watched as they scrambled to understand that their plan had backfired. The new owners, confused but firm, began unloading their furniture, while my in-laws were forced to stand aside. The situation escalated quickly. My in-laws refused to leave the property, insisting that they had the right to live there. They tried to push their way into the house, but the new owners weren't having it. "We'll call the police," they threatened, and my in-laws finally backed off, though not without making a scene. My mother-in-law started shouting about how the house was supposed to be hers, how she had been planning to live there for years. It was as if she had completely forgotten that I was standing right in front of her. I stayed quiet, watching her unravel. As much as I wanted to yell back, I knew that staying calm was the only way to get through this. I had already won the battle by selling the house. There was no need for further confrontation. My mother-in-law, now desperate, turned to me with pleading eyes. "Please, Hannah, this house belongs to our family. We need it," she begged, her voice shaking. But her desperation didn't move me. I had seen enough of her manipulative ways, and I wasn't about to fall for them again. "I'm sorry," I said firmly, "but the house is no longer mine. The new owners have every right to be here." My in-laws stood there, stunned, as the reality of the situation finally hit them. Their plans had crumbled, and they had no choice but to leave. As they drove away, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was over, at least for now. But deep down, I knew that this wasn't the last I'd hear from them. My mother-in-law wasn't the type to give up easily. She would be back, and I needed to be prepared for whatever she had planned next. In the days following their failed attempt to take over the house, I tried to move on. I returned to work, focusing on rebuilding my life without Tyler. But the peace didn't last long. One night, I received a call from the police. My mother-in-law had been caught trying to set fire to the property. She had doused the area with gasoline, preparing to commit arson. But thankfully, a neighbor had stopped her just in time. I was horrified. I couldn't believe that she had become so obsessed with the house that she would resort to something so extreme. The police arrested her on the spot, and she was charged with attempted arson. I was left to deal with the fallout, apologizing to the new homeowners and trying to make sense of how things had spiraled so far out of control. The incident with the fire shook me to my core. I knew my mother-in-law was manipulative, but I never thought she would go this far. Her obsession with the house had consumed her entirely, and now she was facing the consequences. The new homeowners were understandably furious, and they even threatened to sue me. I did everything I could to smooth things over, offering my sincerest apologies and assurances that this would never happen again. It took time, but eventually, they forgave me. As for my mother-in-law, she was sentenced to time in prison, and my father-in-law, fed up with her destructive behavior, filed for divorce. Their marriage had been crumbling for years, and this was the final straw. In the end, my mother-in-law lost everything: her freedom, her marriage, and the house she had coveted for so long. With my mother-in-law behind bars and my father-in-law out of the picture, I finally found some semblance of peace. I moved into a smaller house, away from the chaos, and started to rebuild my life from scratch. Though the grief of losing Tyler still weighed heavily on me, I knew he would want me to be happy and free from the toxic influence of his parents. The money from the sale of the house gave me some financial stability, but more importantly, it gave me a fresh start. I no longer had to live in fear of my in-laws trying to take what was mine. I was free. As I sat in my new home, I reflected on everything that had happened. The battle with my in-laws had been exhausting, but in the end, I had come out stronger. And with that strength, I was ready to face whatever came next.